I want to encourage you, take your Bibles, open with me to Psalm 19. Psalm 19. We're going to look at the first 6 verses together. You'll find that on page 456 if you're using one of the Bibles from the chair in front of you. If you're watching right now on the live stream online or later in the week, I want to welcome you. We're so glad that you found us and you've tuned in to join us. And we'll just encourage you, if you're able to come on a Sunday morning, join us here at Breezeport Baptist Church. We would invite you to do that and take a step with us into authentic biblical community. Well, we're in week number 6 of our summer series that we've entitled The Problem with Christianity Is. Right? And there is this short list of things that as you're talking with unbelievers, as you're talking with people that are skeptical about Christianity, if you talk long enough, you're going to get to a point in that conversation where if they're honest with you, they'll say, you know what my problem with Christianity is? And they'll tell you. You know why I could never be a Christian? And they'll tell you. And the list really isn't all that long. These are very common things that come up over and over again in our conversations with skeptical people who are bent far from God. And we can look at this list and we can think that, boy, there's some really daunting things on there. And yet the Bible has answers to all of these things to help not only us understand them, but help us communicate them to people who are far from God in a way that they can understand them and help to overcome these obstacles that they have to faith in Jesus Christ. And we pray, Lord willing, see them come to faith. This morning, we're going to talk about what I think is a huge problem for a lot of people, and it's the problem of science. And here's how the argument typically goes, right? People will say, science deals with facts and faith deals with myths. Science can be tested and verified, faith can't. The science provides concrete answers, faith doesn't. And so there's a whole lot of people today that sound like Esqueleto. You know who Esqueleto is? He was the wrestling partner to Jack Black in Nacho Libre, right? And you've seen that movie? That I'm using a cultural reference. They're not helpful if you've never seen the movie? Repent of your grievous sin and watch Nacho Libre. But in that movie, he says, you're always coming down on me. Why? Because I believe in science. Right? That was his deal. And there are a lot of people in our culture today who would say, I don't believe in religion. I don't believe in myths. I believe in science because science is concrete. Science can be measured. Science can be tested. Science can be verified. And faith issues can't. And listen, we've got to know how to navigate and have those kinds of conversations because it's a position held by an ever-increasing number of people. Let me remind you of our premise statement that just lays underneath as a foundation of all that we've been talking about this summer. We live in a post-Christian era, a post-Christian culture where people would say, listen, Christianity had its day in America. It didn't work. We've moved beyond it into other things. And most people will say, I am spiritual but not religious, right? And they lump Christianity in with all the other religions. We live in a post-Christian era where the fundamentals of the faith are routinely questioned by an increasingly skeptical culture that is bent far from God, therefore. And when we hit that therefore, we're always presented with a choice. And most Christians in our post-Christian era that we live in today, when they hit that therefore, what they will say is, therefore, I'm not going to talk about these things. They're divisive. People don't like it. I want to be liked by people. Therefore, I'm not going to talk about faith. I'm not going to talk about these kinds of issues. But that's not the position that we can take. Therefore, as Christ followers, we must be ready to give a defense of the faith. Why? Not so that you come across as smart, as intellectual, not so that you can win arguments, not so that you can feel superior to people, but for the joy of all people in Christ Jesus. You're not looking to win arguments, you're looking to win hearts to Christ, that they might be saved and experience the fullness of joy in Him who they formerly did not believe in. And so, here's my question this morning with regard to this topic of the problem of Christianity is its relationship to science. Here's the question I want you to keep in your mind. What if science and faith were never meant to stand in opposition to one another? What if science and faith were meant to work together to lead us to God? Well, if that were true, that would change the whole conversation. So we're in Psalm 19. We're going to root ourselves in a text of Scripture, and then we're going to tackle some evidence that deals with this issue. Psalm 19, verses 1 through 6. David, the psalmist, writes this: "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims His handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them He has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. His rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat." This is a very significant text of Scripture because, listen, it tells us what the purpose of creation is. It tells us why creation was created. And it tells us that the purpose of creation is to point us to God. He says in verse 1, the heavens, right there, he's talking about the stars above us, right? He's talking about the sun and the moon, those trillions of stars that are above us. He says that these heavens, they declare, they proclaim, they speak out, they shout out what? The glory of God. Glory means weight. It means worth. That the heavens, the starry host above us, they cry out the weight and worth of the Creator God. He says, day by day, these things pour out speech. Night to night, they reveal their knowledge. Night after night, day after day, creation is telling us what it knows. And specifically, it's telling us what it knows about the Creator God. And he says to us, there is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. He's saying to us that this, as creation cries out what it knows to be true about God, it declares this to everyone on the planet, regardless of the language that they speak, regardless of their culture, regardless of where they're located on the face of the earth, that creation screams out the same message day after day and night after night. From the stars of the sky, to the sun, to the moon, to the oceans, to the mountains, to the creatures that inhabit this planet from one end to the other. As you look into telescopes and as you look into microscopes, you see life, and all of it is crying out one message in every language to every people in every place on the face of the earth, and it's crying out, there is a God, there is a God, there is a God. And so when you look into a telescope, the message that should come back to us is that there is a God who made all of this. When you look into a microscope, the message that should come back to you is that there is a God who made all of this. When you look into creation, you see the diversity of life, it should cry out to you that there is a God who made all of this. Everywhere we look on planet Earth, you know what we find? Uniquely among all the other planets that our scientists have surveyed, that we've been able to detect, and we've been able to put microwave radio telescopes and so on onto. You know what we've discovered about Earth that we haven't seen anywhere else, including planets that we have actually visited in our own solar system? Is that everywhere on planet Earth there is life. And nowhere else is there life. They send a submarine down to the deepest parts of the ocean, and what they discovered is there's these sulfur vents down there, and they're just spewing out sulfurous gas that under normal conditions would kill any living thing. But you know what they find down there? Bacteria that are literally just eating it up. I mean, they just love it. They developed a submarine that NASA intended to put under the Arctic ice, because they said, listen, nothing can survive under the Arctic ice, so that will simulate the Martian environment in terms of our equipment and so on. So we're going to send it there, the harshest environment on planet Earth where no life can possibly exist. And they put this goes back a couple of years. It was on the news. It was amazing. I just was praising God in my living room watching the news. They put this submarine underneath the Arctic ice, and what swims by their camera? A little shrimp. Just doing its shrimp thing, right? Just glorifying God under the ice. No human eye had ever set eye on it before, but it's just doing its thing. And what they found is there are sea stars and all these things. There's this whole diversity under there, and it's all just glorifying God. You know, when you look in the mirror, the thing that ought to shout back at you is that there is a God who has made you, and not just because of the intricacy of your own human body, which is amazing, but the fact that you are your own environment. Do you recognize that? This will gross some of you out. I find it amazing. It's estimated that the average person is made up of 30 trillion human cells. That is 30 trillion cells that bear your DNA. But you are host, now listen, you are host to an estimated 36 trillion bacteria that live inside you and that live on you. And so you literally are a walking, biodiversified environment. I think that's pretty awesome. Kind of gross, but pretty awesome. Right? And so everywhere we look, what we see on earth is life and a diversity of life. Consider just these facts. Put these pictures up just so you have something that you can sort of contextualize in your mind. The universe is estimated, according to most recent estimates, to be 92 billion light years across. So that's not our galaxy. Okay, that's not our Milky Way solar system with these planets revolving around our sun. That's the whole universe, okay? The universe is estimated to be 92 billion light years across. And in our first week together in this series, what we talked about is the universe right now is expanding. Time and space is literally expanding into non-time and non-space, right? So it's getting bigger all the time. If you don't know what 92 billion light years are, I'll break it down into miles. That would be 5 times 10 to the 23rd miles wide. And if you're having trouble with that one, what I want you to do on your paper is you just write a 5, and then you put 23 zeros on the other side of that, and that's how wide the universe is estimated to be. There are an estimated 100 octillion stars in the universe. Again, what's an octillion? I don't know. I got to look it up. 1 times 10 to the 29th. So you put a 1 on your paper, and you put 29 zeros on the other side of that. That's how many stars are estimated to be in the universe. And those 100 octillion stars are spread out over 10 trillion galaxies. The Milky Way being just one of those 10 trillion galaxies. Our sun, which the psalmist, notice what the psalmist says about the sun. In them, he says, he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom. So imagine the bridegroom on his wedding day coming out. He's got his tux on. I mean, he is just dressed to the nines. He's ready to go and receive his bride. This is like his best day. He said, when the sun rises, he comes out like a bridegroom, leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Our sun is an average-sized star. It's really nothing significant in the scope of not only our galaxy, but of the universe itself. It's just average size. But consider this. The surface temperature of the sun is 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The core temperature of the sun is 27 million degrees Fahrenheit. NASA just launched a satellite yesterday that's designed to go and, run into the sun. Right? That's going to be amazing. 27 million degrees Fahrenheit. Our sun converts 5 million tons of its own mass into energy every single second. 5 million tons of its own weight, of its own mass, into energy every single second, and it's still burning like crazy up there. And every time we build a new telescope, we find new stuff. And every time we build new microscopes, we find new stuff. And it all points us to God. And this is what I want us to understand this morning. If this question of what if science and faith were never meant to stand in opposition to each other, but what if science and faith were actually meant to work together to lead us to God? Scientific pursuit, listen, was actually built into God's original design for creation and for humanity. How do I know that? Genesis 1, 14 through 15. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. Do you see that little phrase tucked in the middle of the verse? And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. You know what that means? Is that God intended that humankind would look up into the heavens and they would see predictability. They would see order there, and that they would recognize over time that, hey, that constellation, that group of stars was in that same place not long ago. I wonder what that means. Well, it's harvest time. It's planting time. A whole year has gone by. Why? Because the stars above us are predictable. God designed into creation scientific pursuit and inquiry, assuming that we would study the world that He gave us, assuming that we would seek to understand it and that we would learn from it. But that's not all. Genesis 1:26, now we're on the sixth day of creation. God is creating humankind, and He's giving mankind what I would call the divine mandate for humanity on the earth. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heaven, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Listen, dominion, we have this idea that dominion simply means like authority, so we can go around just stomping on all the stuff that we want, and we can take from the earth whatever we want. That's not what God has in mind here. When He speaks about humans' dominion over the earth, it's about stewardship. It's about caretaking the earth that He's given to us. And you can't have dominion over the fish of the sea unless you study the fish of the sea. You can't have dominion over the birds of the air unless you study the birds of the air. You can't have dominion over the things, the livestock that walks upon the earth, unless you study them and you know how God designed them and you know what they need in order to flourish and so on. As you know what kind of environment, what kind of food and so on that they need to flourish. And so not only has God designed in scientific pursuit in the orderliness that we see in creation, but it's part of the divine mandate as we exercise God-given dominion under the earth, that we would look into creation and we would see order and design and built, and we would study it and understand it and leverage it to accomplish what God would give us to do. There's a book out there called Without a Doubt. It's written by a man named Kenneth Richard Samples. And in that book, what he does is he gives us 10 aspects of biblical Christianity that actually promote and encourage scientific inquiry. I don't have time to go through all 10. Again, the book is Without a Doubt, and you can get that if you'd like. I'm going to give you just 4. First one, God reveals Himself through creation. That is a Christian understanding of creation, that it is serving the purpose of revealing God to us. And so we say, why is the universe 92 billion light years across? It's so that we would look at that immense distance and we would say that our God is bigger than that. That He created all of that. That the Bible says He's literally holding it all together by the power of His will. And that He not only created it, He exists outside of it and above it, but He fills it with His glory. Why is the sun so hot? Because when we look at that surface temperature of the sun, 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, that core temperature of the sun, 27 million degrees Fahrenheit, and then we think about the holiness of God, and then our God is a consuming fire. We could look at the sun that we have to shield our eyes from because it will burn our retinas, so we can see God's holiness is like that. That's why Isaiah saw the Lord high and lifted up in Isaiah 6, and he said, woe is me, I am undone. Literally, I'm coming apart in the brightness of the glory of God that in His sinful flesh He could not stand in the presence of. When you look at the sun and you got to shield your eyes and squint and your eyes water, it's meant to evoke in us, our God is like that. Why did God create water? Why did God create bread? So that in the fullness of time, Jesus Christ could come and say, I'm living water. And if you drink of me, you will never thirst again. And we've been thirsty. You've been working outside in your yard and you're sweating and you're hot and the sun's been baking on you, and you walk into the house and you get an ice cold glass of water and you drink that down and you put it on the counter. You say, that you could know that Jesus is like that. He satisfies you. Why did He create hot, moist bread filled with all these crannies that just capture the butter and they run into it? And so when you bite into that bread, that butter flavor just explodes into your mouth. It's so that Jesus says, when you eat that bread and then you, through faith, you take me in and I become a part of you, I'm like that. And we would say, I know what that is. God reveals Himself through creation. Second thing He says, again, there's 10, I'm giving you 4. There is order in creation, therefore creation can be studied. It's not random. We don't look at the stars today and come back a year from now and wonder what it's going to look like, right? We know because there's order and predictability, therefore it can be studied. If every day it was like a random number generator, you couldn't study it. But it's not. There's order in creation, so it can be studied. Third one I'm going to give you, the intellectual faculties needed for scientific discovery are God-given. What does that mean? It means we can actually glorify God in our pursuit of scientific understanding. That the minds that we have that can do mathematics and can understand biology and can create machines that look into the heavens and look into the body, that those things can be used for the glory of God because they're God-given. Fourthly, last one that I'll give you, the original mandate to subdue the earth encourages scientific pursuits as we exercise our God-given dominion. Again, that's a uniquely Christian perspective. So here's what I want you to understand. People of faith, right? Christ followers, people of faith, should have no problem with what I would refer to as the observational sciences. By observational sciences, I mean things that can be tested, things that can be subjected to the scientific method, things that can be verified through repeated experimentation. As people of faith, we should have no problem with those kinds of things. What would they be? Physics, biology, chemistry, biochemistry, zoology, mathematics, genetics, all of these kinds of things. We should have no problem with those. And listen, if you're a young person here and you have the passion, you have the mental capacities to pursue these kinds of things, you need to. We need Christ followers working in these fields. Where there is a divide, however, where we have to choose a different path, is not with observational science, but with what has been referred to as origin science. Origin science has been called historical science, or what I would refer to as unobservable science. And historical, origin, unobservable science deals with questions like, how did it all start? How did we get here? Those kinds of questions, for which there were no human eyewitnesses, and which cannot be tested through the scientific method and repeated experimentation. How do I know that? Because there's never been a scientist in any lab anywhere on the earth that has recreated the earth. Hasn't happened. They have not recreated life from nothing. Hasn't happened. And so when it comes to these kinds of things, origin science, historical science, unobservable science, there is a departure that us as people of faith have to take here. From a naturalistic point of view, a naturalistic point of view intentionally leaves God out of the conversation. The leading theories for the origin of life talk about meteors carrying crystals that harbored on them the seeds of life from the far reaches of our galaxy. These crystal-carrying meteors that had within them these seeds of life crash-landed on ancient Earth, landing in what is described as a primordial soup of all kinds of different chemicals just sort of floating around there. The seeds of life carried from distant part of the galaxies land in this primordial soup, and then this combination is struck by lightning at just the right time, in just the right way, to cause these chemicals and these crystal-bearing or seeds of life-bearing crystals to coalesce and form proteins and enzymes. And then over the course of time, these things coalesce together to form a single-celled living organism. And then over billions and billions and billions of years, through the mechanisms of random chance and mutation, that single-celled organism diversified to the point where these early creatures crawl out of this primordial soup onto land, and then again, through random chance and mutation over billions of years, these creatures diversified into all of life on planet Earth as we now know it today, and that have come before us and have been extinct many, many years ago. The current estimate is that there are 8.7 million different species of plant and animals on planet Earth right now, and what a naturalistic explanation of the origins of life would have you believe is that all 8.7 million of them began in a primordial soup struck by lightning after being hit by a meteor. Can I suggest to you, and I'm doing this with humility, can I suggest to you that there are some real scientific problems to that theory? Again, I want you to consider some things, and there's going to be some numbers and so on, but I want you to follow along with me. Single-celled organisms are not simple-celled organisms. There's a tremendous amount of complexity built into an amoeba, for instance, a single-celled organism. The simplest single-celled organism has 500 protein-coding genes that tell it how it's to live and function. Humans, by contrast, have over 20,000 protein-coding genes. A grain of rice has 466 million DNA base pairs. 466 million DNA base pairs that contain everything necessary to make that grain of rice a grain of rice. Humans have 3 billion DNA base pairs. What that means is that evolution would have to have a mechanism to add beneficial genetic information to the code where it previously did not exist. And listen, loved ones, mutation is not that mechanism, because mutation very rarely adds beneficial information. It is almost always harmful to the host. Beyond that, it would actually have to have a mechanism wherein new systems that did not exist all of a sudden now exist. Imagine the complexity that it takes to develop a nervous system where in a single-celled amoeba, there is no such thing as a nervous system. There isn't even a single nerve. There is nothing to convey sensory perception. And yet in higher life forms, there is a nervous system, and then there is a complex design of enzymes and receptors that make that nervous system function. Random chance and time resulting from mutation is not the mechanism to add complex information to the genetic code where it did not previously exist. It's one thing to fiddle with the recipe a little bit, but we're talking adding systems that were not there. So there is no beginning system for nerves in a single-celled organism. And yet they exist. Speciation, the kind of thing that Darwin described on the Galapagos Islands, where certain types of birds developed into unique species, right? Because the shape of their beak changed based on the kind of food that was available to them on the various islands. And so Darwin saw this speciation or this species specialization, and he said this must be proof of evolution. Speciation is a normal process that takes place in creation all the time. Species adapt to the environment in which that they're in, and certain species that have certain characteristics thrive, and certain species that lack those characteristics, they fall away. Listen, speciation never causes one species to cross to become a different kind. What do I mean by that? I mean this. You can breed dogs together millions and millions of times, and you can get Labradoodles and Peekapoos and all kinds of different things. Listen, you will never get a cat. Because all the mutation, listen, all the mutation, all the specialization, all the crossbreeding will never cause one species to jump kind and become a different kind. Cows do not become horses. And a single-celled amoeba does not become a human. It cannot happen. And nowhere in the observable sciences would anyone suggest that it does. But in the historical sciences, where no one was there to be an eyewitness, they're grabbing at ideas. Biological evolution resulting from random chance and mutation over time does not explain the irreducible complexity of biological systems that we see everywhere around us. This is the idea of irreducible complexity. Biological evolution does not explain irreducible complexity. Let me give you some examples. These are very common. They're some of my favorite. I love talking about these things. You might have a hard time seeing them. What we have up there is a picture of a bombardier beetle, a giraffe, and a sea slug. Can I suggest to you, again with humility, that biological evolution cannot explain the existence of these creatures? It can't explain you either. The bombardier beetle has pouches in its abdomen that contain two different chemicals. And not only does it have these pouches that contain these two different chemicals, but it has a mechanism to expel these chemicals out of its body, so that they actually mix together in midair, causing an explosion, if you will, that burns at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if the existence of a bombardier beetle is explained through random chance and mutation over billions of years, it makes no sense. Why would the bombardier beetle have mutated to have either one of these chemicals without a delivery system? What purpose would it have served from an evolutionary perspective? If it had one and not the other, dead beetle, right? Can't defend itself. If it has both but not a means to deliver them, dead beetle. If it has both but not a means to segregate them in its abdomen, dead beetle, right? If it has both but not a means to expel them in a way that allows them to combine in midair, dead beetle. All the systems necessary to make a bombardier beetle had to be there from the beginning, or you just have a bunch of dead beetles. The giraffe came to mind because last Monday, Michelle and I were down at the what is it called? The Animal Adventure Park or something like that. It's north of Binghamton. It's where the giraffes were that were all over the internet a little while ago. Well, that giraffe is pregnant again, and the webcam is going and so on. It's a fine thing to go to, but the bull giraffe there is 17 feet tall. You get to be literally face to face with this thing, right? I mean, it is right there, leaning down. You can feed it. 17 feet tall. It's not even fully grown yet. They're expecting it'll get to 19 to 20 feet tall when it's fully grown. Amazing creature. A full-grown male giraffe has a heart that's over 2 feet long. And it has to be that big in order to pump blood all the way up the length of its neck to its brain, right? Otherwise, if you don't have oxygen to your brain, what happens? You pass out, right? And if you're a giraffe on the Serengeti plains of Africa and you pass out because you don't have oxygen to your brain, what do you become? Lunch for lions, right? Yeah, dead giraffe, right? And so what happens when a 17-foot tall giraffe bends over, as this one is, to get a drink out of this little pond, and that 2-foot heart is still pumping all that blood up the length of that neck, but now it has the additional help of gravity pulling all of it down into the brain. The giraffe's brain explodes. That's what happens. But that's not what happens, is it? The giraffe bends down and get a drink, lifts his head up, he's no worse for wear. Why? Because there are in the main artery that feeds the brain of the giraffe all these little check valves. And so as the giraffe bends over to get a drink, these check valves close and they keep that pressure, right, that blood pressure from reaching the brain. And then what happens is that last little bit that gets to the brain before he bends over, that's all captured in a sponge-like cavity at the base of its brain. because what happens then when the giraffe stands back up and there's no blood to feed its brain, right, because all these check valves are closed, it passes out and it's line lunch, right? And so what happens is it stands back up and all these check valves are opening, but that blood flow has to catch up. That sponge-like section at the base of its brain releases that stored blood into the brain to oxygenate it until the regular blood flow catches up. Evolution cannot provide an explanation for that. All those systems had to be in place when the giraffe was created, or you just have a bunch of dead giraffes. The sea slug. Sea slugs eat sea anemones. Sea anemones have these little stinging cells all over it, so that when anything that would do harm to the sea anemone touches it, these things will explode and sting them. It's its defense mechanism. And yet the sea slug eats sea anemones, and it's unharmed in the process. Why? Because the sea slug has these mechanisms built into its digestive system so that when it eats the sea anemone, it actually captures these stinging cells, moves them from its stomach to these sacs on the outside of its body through these ciliated tubes. Ciliated means like in your nose and your ears, these little hairs that go back and forth, and just sort of move them along like a conveyor belt, takes these stinging cells, move them along these ciliated tubes to these sacs in its skin where the sea slug uses the sea anemone's stinging cells for its own defense. If that's not all there from the beginning, the first time the sea slug eats the first sea anemone, it's a dead sea slug. So listen, what I'm trying to say to you is that biological evolution does not provide a suitable explanation for the irreducible complexity that we see in life all around us. If it doesn't start with everything, it doesn't live long enough to reproduce. It has to be there from the beginning. And evolution cannot adequately explain the simultaneous development of all of these complex systems. And listen, people who study these things, they actually know that. They just don't tell us. Notice this quote, Stephen Jay Gould, Harvard paleontology professor. The extreme rarity of transitional forms, so when they look at the ground, right, and they're studying fossils and so on, the transitionary forms are the things that evolution would say move us from one species to another species and jump kinds and create new orders of animals and so on and so forth. The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists, notice what he says, as the trade secret of paleontology. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. The rest is inference. You know what inference is? It's a guess. So here's a paleontologist. He studies these things for a living at Harvard. You may have never gone to Harvard, but you think people who go there are pretty smart. Admitting that the drawings in our textbooks, there's some hard data, especially at the ends that show apes and monkeys and humans and horses and giraffes. Certainly we have evidence for those things and some others but all the different stuff that connects them together, he says, we're guessing. But they don't tell you that. When they tell it to you, they tell it to you like it's what? Fact. Why? Because when it comes down to origin science, origin, historical, unobservable science that deal with these kinds of issues, listen, it always comes down to a belief system. Richard Lewontin, Harvard biology professor, so again, you've probably never been to Harvard, but you think people who are there are pretty smart. He says this, it is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world. The phenomenal world is the physical world around us that can be seen and tested and so on, and so it can be experienced. He says it isn't that the scientific method says we have to have a material perspective. It could be that faith and science are meant to work together. He's not excluding that. Notice what he says. But on the contrary, that we are forced by an a priori adherence to a material clause. A priori, just Latin, previously held. He's saying we start from a position, and that's what we start from, a materialistic position in our scientific inquiry. We cannot allow a divine foot in the door. So it isn't that the scientific method says we have to leave God out. It's the fact that there are a tremendous amount of scientists out there who start from a position that says, I cannot in my mind admit that there is a God, and therefore I am going to consider the evidence through a particular belief system that says there is no God, everything has a material cause. It's the starting point, listen, to their faith system that determines that they have to look at the evidence in a certain way. So understand this, issues of origin always come down to a faith position. Their faith position, that there is no God, leaves them unaccountable in their mind and free to do whatever they want, however they want, whenever they want, because there's no one that they're accountable to. There's no one that is going to hold them to a standard for how they live their life and the choices that they make. But their belief system that on the one hand leaves them accountable, for a great many people in our day and age would say, that's great, that's what I want. I don't want accountability. I don't want there to be a God who has authority over my life to tell me how I'm supposed to live my life. I want to be free in my conscience to do what I want, when I want, how I want. That's an upside for a great many people in our culture. You know what the downside of that is? They're also left without meaning. They're left without purpose. They're left without that sense of worth that God designed into humanity as image bearers of God. And listen, your heart doesn't wake you up in the middle of the night wondering if the sun's going to come up tomorrow. You just know that it's going to, because scientific reason says we are orbiting the sun on an elliptical path, and some days are longer than others and shorter than others. Sometimes it's hotter, sometimes it's cold. But you don't wake up in the middle of the night wondering, is the sun going to come out tomorrow? But you've probably woken up in the middle of the night wondering, why am I here? Who am I? What is my purpose? What am I supposed to do? So the Bible answers those questions. So again, as we draw to a close, I have the privilege of being able to say to you this morning, and maybe for you it's the first time, maybe for you it's the 1,000th time that you've heard this, but listen, loved one, whether you know Christ or whether you don't know Christ, whether you put your faith in Him or whether you haven't, whether you bought into Christianity or whether you're skeptical to Christianity, I have the privilege to be able to say to you this morning that you are not the result of random chance and mutation over billions of years. You are the special creation of God who loves you and has great purpose for your life and designed you and knit you together with great intentionality in your mother's womb. And He looks out over you and He is pleased with what He has made. That's who you are. And why are you here? You are here to glorify Him. You are not here simply to consume. You are not here simply to acquire. You are not here to simply build up your own kingdom. Keep yourself safe until you can pass on your genetic information to someone else who will continue to live, to be able to live beyond you. That is not why you're here. You're here to reveal the weight and worth of the Creator God who in love made you. So listen, you can look into a telescope and you can see that there is a God. And you can look into a microscope and you can see that there is a God. And you can stand at the foot of an ocean and you can see that there is a God. You can stand at the top of a mountain and you can see that there is a God. But listen, you can look at the cross and you can see that God loves you. And He loves you so much that even in your skepticism, even in your doubt, even in your unbelief, even in your rejection of Him, He sent His own Son, Jesus, into the world to live the life that you and I could never live because of our sin and rebellion and our natural bent away from God. And He sent Him to bear your sin, to die on your cross, to pay your debt. He carried your sin after satisfying all the wrath of God, all the anger of God due against you on the cross. He carried your sin into the grave, and then 3 days later, He triumphantly rose from the dead, leaving all that mess behind, so that if you would simply come to Him by faith, the Bible would say you would be forgiven, you would be born again, you would be made new, you would be brought into a new relationship with the Creator God of the universe, not simply where He reigns over you as Creator, the one who holds you accountable, the one who will judge you, but who would come to stand beside you as Father. Listen, if you're here this morning, If you're watching online now or later in the week, someone has sent this link to you and said, I want you to watch this. And you're having to choose between a faith system that says, I come from nothing and I serve no purpose, or a faith system that says that you are dearly loved and intimately known and you have been pursued to this moment. Which one is your heart going to yearn for? And what I'm asking you to do is consider the evidence. Because what is often put forward as fact in our day is not as cut and dry as people want you to believe. Consider the evidence that is before you in creation. Consider the scientific evidence that is before. Weigh it for yourself. And then consider the evidence of faith from the Scriptures and what the Spirit of God may be doing in your heart. So, as I said a few weeks ago, what I encourage you to do is to be a skeptic rather than a cynic. A skeptic is someone who doesn't know, but they're willing to be persuaded by the evidence. A cynic is someone who's already made up their mind and they won't be convinced no matter what the evidence says. Don't be a cynic. Be a skeptic. And so to that end, we have gotten hold of almost a few hundred of these magazines. Okay? It's from creation.com. It's called 6 Days, Not Billions of Years. In it, you will find all kinds of articles that deal with all kinds of things, presenting real scientific information and data for your consideration from a biblical, Christian, and creationist perspective. We want to get these into your hands so that you might actually consider some of the evidence that you have been maybe unwilling to consider so far. We also want to get into your hands if you say, I am convinced, but I don't necessarily know I don't feel equipped to have these kinds of conversations with skeptical people who are far from God, and we want to get it into your hands so you might read some of these things. This is not kid stuff. It's not fluff. There's real science in here so that you might consider these things, that it equips you to be able to have these conversations with the people you work with, people you live around, the people that you go to school with, who are convinced that things that are fact that are not really fact. They're ideas. They're people's best guesses, who begin from a starting point that says there is no God. And so, as you leave this morning, there's going to be ushers again at all three of these doors. If you say, I absolutely do not want one, get it away from me, then you need to go out that door, okay? But otherwise, every door you walk out of, someone's going to want to get one of these into your hands. If you want more than one, because you've got people you want to pass them along to, you're free. We don't want any left over. What I would ask you to do is take the one and then circle back around after everybody who wants one has gotten one. Then you can take really honestly as many as you want, because we don't want any left over. But they are for your consideration. And I trust as you read them, you'll be challenged, you'll be encouraged, you'll be equipped by what you'll discover about God and about the universe that He has made and your place in it as you would read that.